research at the end of this session. So this session 7, is scheduled from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. today. We will be covering several interesting talks from different areas and backgrounds, including how we might use outdoor and indoor spaces in a post-COVID environment, the pollutant transmission and cross-contamination routes in these spaces. And then we will have some interesting talks about how we can apply the advanced and digital tools such as digital twin, energy simulations, and computer visions in the built environment in the post-pandemic era. And then finally, we will also be discussing the importance of the air conditioning systems and infiltration in the future in the resilience of buildings, not only focusing on the COVID-19 situation, but also looking at the climate change challenges, shortage of energy, and increasing expectations of occupants. In order to keep the schedule each speaker will have 10 minutes and 15 minutes for the keynote speech. If there will be remaining time after each presentations, we will be taking questions or two from the audience. If not, we can discuss them at the end during the 20 to 30 minutes interaction and discussion. So let's begin. Our keynote speaker today is Professor Tim Heath. He is a professor of architecture and urban design at the University of Nottingham, where he has been an academic since 1993. He is a registered architect, qualified town planner, and experienced urban designer who is actively engaged in research, teaching, and practice, through which he pursues his passion for cities and place making. He was previously the head of Department of Architecture, Built Environment, Associate Dean in the Faculty of Engineering at Nottingham, and Vice Provost for Research and Knowledge Exchange at its China campus. Professor Tim, we invite you to join us, and if you could please share your video and your presentation.
Thank you, John. Hopefully you can hear me, and I'll share my presentation. If I can find it, just a second. Can you see the screen okay?
Yes, it's
okay,
yeah,
great. So I'll just make it full screen and then we can start.
Yep.
Is it on full screen view for you? There, that should be better. Great. Well,
right now it's on full screen.
Thank you. Well, firstly, just thank you for the opportunity to talk to you all this morning here in the UK and this afternoon in China. You know, I think it's and congratulations, I guess, as well on setting up such an interesting and important symposium between colleagues from Tongji University and University of Nottingham and the many guests who have joined. And hopefully, I'm sure you're going to have a really interesting couple of days. I've had a look through the titles of the talks, and there's some fantastic, interesting research being presented. What I wanted to talk about today, though, was just a little bit about some of the research we've been doing in my group here at Nottingham, which generally focuses, myself and my PhD students focus on research related to public space in cities all over the world, from both qualitative and quantitative dimensions. What I want to speak about today, though, is just a little bit about public space in cities and how that has been impacted by COVID, and speculate a little bit on what the future might be for public space and the ongoing importance of it in society. 4 parts. The first part I'll skip through really quickly because John's just done a very thorough introduction of who I am. The second part, I'll just talk a little bit about what urban public space is. We're all familiar with it, we all experience it every day. Sometimes we take it for granted, but it's a very important part of the lives of people all over the world. Then I want to look at the impact the COVID pandemic has had on public space, and finish by just speculating a little bit on the future of what urban public space might be and how it might change once we're finally through, if we ever get fully through the sort of COVID situation. So John's introduced me, I won't stop on that. Just to stress really the importance for me of being able to do my research and teaching alongside still doing some practice activities as well, because I think the three really complement each other and certainly keep me stimulated and interested in the built environment. So I'll start just by talking a little bit, very briefly, about urban public space and why we need public space. We're all familiar with population growth across the world. We're getting very close to 8 billion people on the planet, and this is going to get probably pretty near to 10 billion by 2050. So not so long, less than 30 years away, we're likely to have increased again quite significantly in terms of the world population. And these people, these extra people, as well as the ones that we already have on the planet, need space for circulation, for recreation and so on, to get around, to meet friends, to socialise and so on. So public space is always going to be very important, and possibly increasingly important in our cities, and we mustn't forget that alongside other development, the need to provide that type of environment for people. Also, as well as that growth, we know that growth is going to be concentrated in cities. We go back just over 100 years and only 10% of the world's population lived in cities. Just after the start of this last decade, about 50% lived in cities, and we know that by 2050, if the current patterns and trends continue, nearly 3/4 of the world's population is going to live in cities. Now that is resulting in increased urban densities, expanding city sizes in some cases, population growth obviously within those cities, and rapid urbanization. And cities are expanding, particularly in Asian countries like China, some in South America, some in Africa, expanding at such a rapid rate that we've never experienced before. And if we're not careful, this sort of public space that we need to provide might be forgotten because of the need to provide more housing, more places for people to work and so on. So we must make sure that it's always at the forefront of what we're doing in terms of the way we're changing our urban areas and our cities. Now, as I said at the beginning, we're all very familiar with public space, the streets, the squares, the parks that we enjoy in our cities. But sometimes I think we take these for granted, and the quality of these spaces is possibly more important than the quantity of them. It's important that we create places that can be used by everyone as well, that they're inclusive places. So whether it's locals, residents, people working in that place, visiting tourists and so on, that these people can use this space whenever they want to, and possibly however they want to as well. So it's adaptable for different situations. Public spaces, places that people come together with their children, as families, come together to socialise, to play, to meet people, and so on. It's also places where we can do various different things. We can rest, relax, meet friends, socialise, have fun. And I think in large, dense cities, these spaces are particularly important because a lot of people are living in very, very small apartments, very small residential environments. And to get fresh air, to relax, to meet people, they need to get out into public space. And you see this in large cities all over the world. It's also, gives us places where we can get together to celebrate, to hold events and festivals, markets, pop concerts, all these sorts of things. These are very important parts of this sort of social life of people living in cities. It gives them that place where they can break away from the sort of working environment, relax, and so on. It's also the places where memories are created for us, probably much more so than within our homes, within our sort of residential environments. When we get out, we see things we've planned to see, that we see things that we never planned to see, that we see the way other people interact. People just enjoy watching other people and being around other people, whether they know them or whether they don't know them. And it's really crucial that we continue to create these opportunities for this to happen. So what's happened to public space during the COVID pandemic? I think like all both internal building environments and external sort of public environments and space environments, things have changed quite significantly during the COVID pandemic. Sometimes out of enforced changes and rules and regulations, and sometimes out of our own sort of personal preferences and choices that we've been making. So public space has generally, over the last 18 months, and we are starting to see that changing, and it's become very empty. People have generally obeyed the rules and stayed at home. And if ever you ventured out into the centre of cities during that time, they were pretty desolate, pretty quiet and not very social environments, which was interesting in a way because it gave us a chance to see the city in a totally different way, in a totally different light, but not necessarily one that we would want to continue over a long period of time. There's been many impacts, so I think certainly in the UK, Europe, US and so on, when you walk around cities now, you'll see some of the legacy of the COVID pandemic. One of the most significant has been the closure of many shops which haven't reopened. Businesses have, or companies have gone out of business. People have shifted in a large way the way they shop, so more people are shopping online now. A few are gradually returning to shopping on the high street, but it's left a significant glut of sort of empty buildings and open space in our cities. The same to a certain extent with bars and cafes and restaurants. Most of them had to close for at least a short period of time, and many have stayed closed permanently as they've gone out of business and so on. I think we are starting now to see a sort of reopening, and we're starting to see perhaps new ventures coming forward as well, which is great to see, and it's starting to enliven our cities a bit more again. But nevertheless, there is a lasting impact of the pandemic. For periods of time, recreational facilities all closed, which again it started to create environments people didn't want to witness, people didn't want to see, so they tended to go out less as well. People were being kept apart, and there's many across the world, many different interesting ways of doing this. So segregating people, lots of signs going up saying, you know, to keep your distance from other people, whether this be 2 meters, 1 meter, 1.5 meters, whatever it might be, telling people which direction to walk and so on. So very much controlling the way people lived within cities, which was something that I think most of us weren't really used to, and perhaps, although we've tended to obey it, we haven't really necessarily enjoyed having to do that. When we've walked around cities as well, everybody's been very sensible and taken precautions and worn face masks and protective visors and so on. But it's sort of led to this sort of experience of not being able to really see people. We don't see smiles, emotions. It's difficult to recognize people. And again, although it's been a very sensible approach, I'm not sure it's something we want to continue over a long period of time. And it creates a very sort of sterile atmosphere and sterile environment. People have come up with different innovative ideas for how they might use public space and keep socially distanced. And these are sort of real photographs, but quite sort of humorous and perhaps thankfully not too common examples of the way people have tried to keep themselves safe and distanced from others. But it's not really how we want to continue to enjoy public space. We don't want to be doing this on a regular basis for a long period of time. Other people have come up with quite innovative design ideas. So this was quite an interesting little project where movable seats were positioned within a public space, so that as the rules changed, these seats could be repositioned, so you could then cluster in groups or whatever. So quite an adaptable, interesting idea, and there's been many examples of this happening, or these sorts of things happening around the world. Spaces being temporarily adapted, and I think it just shows some of the ingenuity of people and local authorities to respond to the challenges that we've been facing and come up with interesting ideas as well. But again, probably not something we want to sort of continue over a long period of time. And I think people have this desire and perhaps need to get back to using public space, at least in a fairly similar way to they did previously. But there has been this importance to use these spaces safely and to adapt them to make that possible. So where might we go into the future of what public space might be and how it might be used? Cities are, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're facing many challenges. As I said at the beginning, urban populations are growing. There's increasing demand from people for different leisure opportunities as well. In most parts of the world, people have got more leisure time and often more resources to spend and so on to maximise that. And so people are demanding opportunities and things to do. We do have limited space. You know, I talked about the population, world's population growing. The amount of space we've got to accommodate them on isn't really changing very significantly. So we've got to accommodate more people in less space. There's a limit to how much most cities can grow. So density is going to go up. The amount of space isn't going to go up. Land prices are likely to go up. So it's really important that cities and local authorities and developers recognise the importance and the need of public open space. Public open space, as well as being an important resource for people, does actually add value to the real estate around that public space as well. And people will pay a premium to be by public space, to have views of it and so on. So it's important developers recognise that in the future of the way we're creating our cities and changing our cities. Obviously, with the pandemic, we've had sort of restricted access, social distancing. Some of this is likely to continue for a little bit of time. There's been increased costs for building owners and space owners for cleaning, providing sanitising products and things like that. The viability of a lot of commercial operations has been challenged. I mentioned bars, shops and things closing during the pandemic. There's been fewer visitors, and even now there's still fewer visitors than there used to be to the streets, public spaces, even the buildings. So the financial viability of these operations is still being challenged. There's been a lot less demand in cities due to fewer tourists travelling and visitors coming to our cities. And there's still questions about whether people will ever really return to using the city as the way they did, in the same ways as they did before. My suspicion is that gradually we will, but I think people are always going to have this awareness now, and hopefully cities have developed this ability now to be resilient and to change and adapt, so that space can still be made available, but perhaps in different ways at different times. There are, however, a lot of opportunities in terms of public space design. People are generally travelling less. They're staying more local in the way they use cities, and they still want to use public space in a sort of quite a dynamic way. So as densities do increase, it's going to create more pressure, more stress on the space available, but it also creates opportunities for new ways of creating space, perhaps not even traditional space. And a few of my students are doing a lot of research on how we create public space at height within buildings or on buildings, and the way that we might be more creative as well in terms of the types of space we're creating. So increasingly as well, there's always been a lot of debate about how public space really is and the rules and restrictions on users and so on. And I think increasingly people are demanding, if you like, private social spaces within buildings. So there's just a few of many examples here, and you see these in cities all over the world where privatized public space is being created, or social space is being created, both within and on and around buildings as they're constructed. And I think with people having increased worries and anxiety about being around a lot of people, I think the opportunity for these types of space will increase, and I think developers need to be aware of that and think about the opportunities for these types of places when they're creating new buildings. Now, having said that, and how there might be new opportunities, I think the hope is around the world that the vaccine, as we all get vaccinated once, twice, probably 3 times, and even possibly more with boosters and so on, that we will be able to return to some sort of normality in the way we use public space. We want to return to these sort of experiences where we see people happy outside, enjoying themselves on their own, in couples, in groups, in family groups, meeting friends. We all like to walk around cities and see these sort of experiences, and to socialize, or at least be amongst other people socializing. So hopefully we are going to return to some sort of normality. We will see our public spaces busy again, but we do need to be aware that there's going to be future outbreaks of some sort of virus inevitably, and we need to learn the lessons from this period we've been through over the last 18 months to 2 years, and think about new and creative ways of both creating, designing and using public space. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of food for thought first thing on this day of the symposium. And thank you all for listening. And if any of you do have any sort of questions and so on, please either email me or drop it in the chat, and I'd be happy to communicate with you. So thank you all, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today.
Thanks, Tim, for the very interesting talk. And I think it sets the theme for this workshop session. I think it will be very relevant to the work of Murtaza, who will be discussing the impact of urban spaces and geometry on the, for example, the cross-contamination of pollutants, and also for Yishu, who's going to give an insight on how we can better design spaces, but this one for indoor spaces for home-based work. I guess we have some time for some questions. Do we have any questions from the audience for Professor Tim? Yes, Sally.
John, I have a question. So Tim, thank you very much for the very interesting talk and opening our eyes to the changes of the public spaces, that how they have changed and shaped so differently. Also the fact that during the COVID, perhaps that was the only place we could also go out to. The rules and everything as well, so stretching the legs and having some fresh air, public space also showed its value to us as well. Now, coming back to the very end point of your talk, mentioning going back to some normalities and the potential of future pandemics, what measures do you recommend that public spaces and public open spaces need to consider in order to be much more useful and adaptable to potential future pandemics? Thank you.
Wow, it's a really good question. I think. Oh, sorry, just let me. Sorry. I think, yeah. So it's a tricky question, actually. I mean, from my point of view, in public space, we need to be encouraging as many different people and from different backgrounds and so on to. Sorry, sorry about that. To use these spaces, and I think the evidence seems to be that people generally who are catching COVID and other viruses and things, public space isn't tending to be the place where they actually catch it. It tends to be in other environments, more enclosed environments. And I think, as you said, hopefully one of the positives to come out of the pandemic is people have started to realise, as you said, the importance of outdoor space to our mental health, our physical health, and just the importance of getting fresh air and exercise and so on, which most people can't do within their own homes. And most people around the world don't have in the UK we tend to be quite lucky because a lot of us have gardens and things like that, but in most parts of the world people don't have gardens. They'll live in small apartments, and public space becomes their outside environment. I think we just need to make sure that cities, and I think we can learn a lot of lessons from what's happened over the last 2 years, as I said, to think about how spaces can be adapted and changed as is necessary. But I think we need to make sure that our public space is as flexible as it possibly can be, so people can use it in many different ways at different times. So it's not the design of it, the layout of it, the construction of it creates, the opportunity for it to be a different place at different times for different people. So that different users can use it in many different ways, so that public space can provide those opportunities that people want. I'm not sure in terms of, yeah, there's all sorts of things you can do, if it's new public space, to make sure that it's well ventilated, that you get, it's designed in a way that the prevailing winds and things are going to blow through it, so you sort of purify it and clean it and so on. So there's all those sort of environmental things you can do as well, in different parts of the world, making sure that it's you provide the right amounts of shade if it's too hot, or in the UK provide the opportunities for people to get some sunshine if and when we do get some. So thinking about those environmental factors as well is obviously continues to be really important. I think that's always been the case, but maybe the pandemic's just sort of highlighted that a little bit more.
Thank you very much, Tim. And also I was wondering things like, I was desperate for a beer garden perhaps in the summer, because it was safe to sit outside, and most places in the UK are all pubs and indoor. So maybe this became outdoor space, which was quite deserted, as you showed us nicely in those wonderful photos, then maybe could have adapted to allocate some of those beer gardens so that the companies don't go bust either, as again of your discussion.
Yeah, I think sort of commercial pop-up opportunities I think would be great. You know, I think, you know, if we can't use indoor environments, then we can, as you say, we can eat and drink outside. We can, you know, if maybe it needs some cover, maybe it doesn't, depending on where it is in the world. We can have outdoor retail, pop-up markets, things like that, you know, so people can still be out in the fresh air in relatively healthier environments than having to go indoors if necessary. So yeah, I think you're right, having that sort of flexibility. And for local authorities, for city governments and so on, they've got to facilitate that to a large degree, particularly within public space. You know, the onus is on them, the importance is with them to try and to think creatively about creating that sort of possibility.
All right, thanks for that, Tim.
Welcome.
Do you have any more questions from the chat? I guess not. I think we can continue in the discussion, and we're going to move on to the next speaker. Once again, many thanks, Tim, for
thank you. You're welcome.
Keynote talk, and
thank you for the opportunity.